Arabs started turning against China when Trump brought Xi Jinping into the center of the crisis and showed in front of the world that Beijing doesn't control Iran as it tries to claim. On May 16, 2026, the shift in the Gulf carries enormous political weight. Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations realized that China promised stability, mediated rapprochements, bought oil, acted as a responsible power, but failed when it came to containing Tehran at the region's most sensitive point. Trump arrived in China talking about Iran, nuclear weapons, and keeping the Strait of Hormuz open, while Xi got stuck in his own game, trying to protect his interests without confronting the Iranian regime, and that's when the mask fell. For Riyadh, the problem isn't just Iran putting pressure at sea, it's China wanting to lead the Middle East without having the courage to restrain its ally, who threatens to set everything on fire. Trump crushed Xi because he laid the contradiction bare. Either Beijing controls Tehran, or the Gulf finds out that Chinese influence is just nice-sounding rhetoric backed by cheap oil. I'll tell you all about this in a moment. But now you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed, real-time information with the best journalistic quality you've ever seen. Setting the standard for credibility. Milson Alves. Trump's visit to China shook up the board because it took Xi out of his comfort zone. According to Reuters, Trump said he talked to Xi about the sanctions against Chinese companies that buy Iranian oil. He stated that the two discussed Iran and emphasized that Tehran cannot have nuclear weapons or keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. Trump made China face the responsibility that Beijing tried to avoid. Either Xi admits that he has influence over Iran, or he acknowledges that the Chinese partnership with Tehran doesn't provide security for anyone. And that's when Saudi Arabia starts to move against China. Not with aggressive public rhetoric, but with a cold calculation for survival. Riyadh has accepted in recent years the rapprochement with Tehran sponsored by Beijing, because China promised to reduce tension, open dialogue, and create a new phase in the Gulf. But when the crisis intensified, Iran continued using regional fear as a weapon. The problem for the Saudis is that Beijing benefits from the image of being a mediator, but hasn't delivered the main thing, real control over Iranian behavior. The Gulf countries also fell into the trap. China wants oil, wants trade, wants influence, and wants to appear as a responsible power. But at the moment when ships started becoming targets, when companies began to fear the maritime route, and when Tehran started dictating passage conditions, Xi Jinping did not confront the Iranian regime. On the contrary, Chinese diplomacy started calling for negotiation, caution, and time. Meanwhile, Iran gained leeway to pressure the world economy. Reuters reported that the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations criticized a proposal from the United States and Bahrain regarding Hormuz, saying that the timing and content were inappropriate. For the Gulf, this sounds like Beijing trying to slow down Washington, but without imposing a strong limit on Tehran. Arab opposition to Xi doesn't need to appear as a formal break, it shows up as distrust. Saudi Arabia talks with Iran, discusses mediation with Pakistan, considers a regional pact, and tries to prevent the region from being pushed into a war dictated by Tehran and tolerated by Beijing. The Saudi Gazette reported that the Saudi Foreign Minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, spoke with the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi about the diplomatic negotiations mediated by Pakistan between Iran and the United States. This shows Riyadh trying to take its own path, without handing its fate over to Chinese calculations. China wanted to appear as the bridge between the Saudis and the Iranians. Now the Gulf realizes that a bridge without stability becomes a passage to crisis. The Financial Times reported that Saudi Arabia discussed the idea of a non-aggression pact between Middle Eastern nations and Iran in talks about how to manage regional tension. This move doesn't strengthen Xi, on the contrary. It shows that Riyadh is trying to create its own diplomatic shield because it doesn't trust that Beijing can control Iran's fury. Meanwhile, Iran reacts in the way it knows best. Tehran realized that Trump brought the crisis into the meeting with Xi and that China was left exposed. If Xi can't fully protect Iran, the regime tries to prove its strength in the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, May 15th, a vessel anchored near the United Arab Emirates was seized and taken toward Iranian waters. Meanwhile, an Indian-flagged cargo ship sank near Oman after an attack that caused a fire on board. Indian authorities said that the 14 crew members were rescued by the Omani Coast Guard and were safe. The responsibility for the attack is linked to the Revolutionary Guard amid the Iranian escalation. If Iran feels free to squeeze the Strait of Hormuz whenever it is pressured, then China's promise of stability goes up in smoke. China depends on the energy that passes through the region, but tries not to pay the political price of restraining its Iranian ally. Trump noticed this contradiction and shed light on it. The result is a strong reversal. The Saudis and their neighbors are beginning to realize that China is not a guarantee of peace. It's just another power trying to take advantage of the crisis. Riyadh knows that Washington comes with costs, demands, and pressure. But it also knows that when Trump talks about Iran, he speaks through sanctions, naval power, tough negotiations, and direct pressure. Xi talks about stability, but lets Tehran test the limits. Trump's own visit to Beijing showed that. Al Jazeera stated that American officials pressured China, asking if China has influence over Iran, why not open the route? If it doesn't, why should the Gulf trust Beijing as a guarantor of regional security? Saudi Arabia turns against China over exactly this issue. The Gulf saw that Beijing doesn't want to pick a fight with Tehran, doesn't want to join Trump's pressure campaign, and doesn't want to lose access to oil. The United Arab Emirates also reflect this new calculus. The Guardian reported that Abu Dhabi sped up a pipeline project to bypass the Strait of Hormuz and protect its oil exports amid the blockade related to Iran. If Iran uses the route as a tool of pressure, and if China doesn't resolve it, each Gulf nation starts looking for its own way out. The Associated Press reported that the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Tehran does not trust the United States and that it has. Ships could transit through Hormuz only if they were not at war with Iran and coordinated with the Navy. That sentence helps explain why the Gulf is on alert, but Xi prefers to stay in the shadows. He wants influence without paying a price, leadership without confrontation, and prestige without risk. Trump's visit dismantled that stance. Now, what happens next is a struggle for control. Saudi Arabia should continue opening diplomatic channels to prevent Iran from pushing the Gulf toward an explosion. The nations in the region should strengthen logistical, energy, and military alternatives so they are not held hostage to Tehran's mood. China will try to preserve its image as a mediator, but it will bear the burden of not having contained its Iranian ally when the crisis reached its most sensitive point. And Trump will continue using pressure on Iran to show that Middle East stability cannot be entrusted to Xi Jinping. I'm Milson Alves, Global, and my purpose is to keep you accurately informed every day. The news links are in the video description. Like this video, subscribe, and check the comments at the end to engage more with the Milson Alves community.